morning and welcome to Inyathelo, the South African Institute for Advancement. I am Ravimbo Gwatirisa, Program Officer for Advancement Training and Support here at Inyathelo. I'm delighted so many civil society organizations are able to join our election debate today. Thank you so much for coming. And thanks to Max Azinski of the ANC, Dr. Wilmot James of the DA, and Nazia Paulson of the EFF for making themselves available. Inyathelo was set up 11 years ago to help build a vibrant democracy in South Africa. We do this by strengthening and helping to sustain our civil society within our civil society organizations and higher education institutions, and developing a strong philanthropic movement rooted in the African cultural heritage of sharing. We support civil society through programs, projects, research, publications, clinics, workshops, products and services, which are aimed at building, maintaining, and improving the support, skills, and funds of a non-profit organization in South Africa. Inyathelo's Breakfast on the Second Floor was set up 3 years ago as a space for energetic and provocative engagement around key issues facing civil society in South Africa. As we approach South Africa's 5th democratic election and 20th year of democracy, it seemed appropriate to look at the role of civil society around the country today and how we can engage with those who hold political power. We will first hear from the political party representatives themselves, and then we'd like to hear from you, our civil society friends and guests. I would like to welcome Inyathelo's Executive Director, Sheila Gastro, who will chair our debate today. Sheila was Director of Fundraising at the University of Cape Town before she helped establish Inyathelo in 2002. She has worked in the nonprofit sector for many years, including with the Institute for a Democratic Alternative for South Africa, IDASA. Welcome, Sheila.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Inyathelo Breakfast on the Second Floor. Inyathelo itself was established to strengthen our universities and our civil society, both as key elements in the framework of our democracy. Universities, besides producing the talent that we need in our economy, are also the engine room of discourse and debate, research and policy development. Civil society, in turn, is a critical space for collective citizen action, a place where individuals, groups and communities can work together towards their rights, their self-reliance, their social transformation, their welfare, and to create social cohesion. It is 20 years since our first democratic election, and in 1994, if we think back, civil society organizations had high hopes they would be provided the opportunity to work together with the political leadership of the ANC to transform our society. Certainly this view seems to have been shared by the ANC, and in the NPO Act of 1997, the following key clause was inserted. Within the limits prescribed by law, every organ of state must determine and coordinate the implementation of its policies and measures in a manner designed to promote, support, and enhance the capacity of non-profit organizations to perform their functions. In addition, the South African government is a signatory of the International Open Government Partnership that commits to transparency and accountability. As part of that declaration, it is committed to supporting civic participation, and I quote again, "We value public participation of all people equally and without discrimination in decision-making and policy formulation. Public engagement, including the full participation of women, increases the effectiveness of governments, which benefit from people's knowledge, ideas, and ability to provide oversight. We commit to making policy formulation and decision-making more transparent, creating and using channels to solicit public feedback, and deepening public participation in developing, monitoring, and evaluating government activities. We commit to protecting the ability of not-for-profit and civil society organizations to operate in ways consistent with our commitment to freedom of expression, association, and opinion. We commit to creating mechanisms to enable greater collaboration between governments and civil society organizations and businesses. This event, Breakfast on the Second Floor, is a regular venue to open discourse around issues that impact on civil society. It provides many of the organizations with which we work an opportunity to engage with these issues. We therefore felt that the upcoming elections provided us with a chance to explore how some political parties view the role of civil society organizations and whether the civil society space should be closed, as is happening in other emerging markets and BRICS countries, or whether it should remain a vibrant hub of ideas and activities. Thank you for joining us all today, and many thanks in advance to the representatives on our panel.
Thank you, Sheila. I'd like to now invite ANC's Max Osinski to share his party's perspectives on the continuing role of civil society in a democratic South Africa. Mr. Osinski is an ANC member of the Western Cape Provincial Legislature. Welcome, Mr. Osinski.
Thank you, Ravimbo. Thanks to the staff at Inyathelo and my fellow participants, hello, and to you, the distinguished representatives of civil society. It's an honor to be here today. The ANC led the broad national liberation movement in South Africa to the strategic breakthrough in 1994. That liberation movement comprised of various organizations and participated in various forms of popular struggle. In fact, the liberation movement had to recreate a mass-orientated civil society in our country after the repression of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And the liberation movement created this broad civil society which played a central role in helping to overcome repression, provide alternative services and ideas to people, helped to create the activist core of the liberation movement itself. In fact, we've had a debate in the ANC where we see the ANC itself as part of civil society whilst remaining today a political party. The ANC is one of the largest mass organizations in the country, and it's very difficult at times to separate between its role as a civil society and a political party. The breakthrough of 1994 created an opportunity to reconfigure the state, other aspects of our society, but obviously based on the limitations of the circumstances of the time and the processes that led to the creation of the new state. The vision of the ANC was to deepen democracy and public participation, people's lives, to change the terrible conditions that the majority of people live in, to ensure equality, broad-based service delivery, and also to create a new situation in the country, a situation that would allow the emergence of new citizens and new forms of citizens' participation. In the last 20 years, we've seen major victories and achievements in this process. The most important is the massive levels of service delivery that have taken place. I don't want to go into the details, but I would like to refer anyone who wants to disagree with that to the census documents which compare the situation in 96 and 2011, which show a complete transformation of the situation in our country. In fact, anyone who lived in South Africa before 94 and lives here today would know the almost fact that we live in two different countries. Part of that process has been the adoption of the new constitution, which places the role of citizens at the forefront of processes of the state. We've also brought, as Sheila has mentioned, new ways of public participation in all levels of state activity. These include formal processes and informal processes. They include what the prescripts of the Constitution as well as all the different requirements for public participation in various laws that are passed. In fact, I think there are very few laws that are passed in Parliament without a prescript for the state to engage in public participation processes. We've also brought laws that have created new forums for public participation. I can mention just a few: school governing bodies, CPFs, health forums, environmental forums, etc. These have been the major achievements and come out of where we come from. I think we can really say the ANC has taken seriously its role as an organ of civil society and brought that into the new state we're still building. Let me say that I think that this process obviously is not a straight line that leads into the sunset. There have been real achievements, but there are also serious issues that still need to be looked at. I want to briefly just contrast that with some of the experience we've had, say, in this province, especially since 2009. I've been in the legislature since 1999. And really, since 2009, what we've seen is the closing down of the provincial legislature in the Western Cape's engagement with civil society. We no longer have any real public participation processes. I've been to a number of committee meetings which were meant to be involved public participation, which had to actually be cancelled because no one pitched up from civil society. And I'm not blaming civil society for that. I'm blaming those in power in the provincial legislature who do nothing to assist the participation of civil society in these processes. In the social development area, many, many NGOs, including NGOs which I'm on the board of, have seen their funding arbitrarily cut. I'm on the board of BABS, which is a civil society organization in Q-Town, one of the oldest black NGOs in the country. And we were told as BABS by the Department of Social Development 3 years ago to employ a social worker to conduct a program with the aged. We did so at our own expense, and the next year the department cut all funding to BABS. We still have to now pay for that social worker they told us to employ out of our own funding. We've also seen the manipulation of civil society processes. I've been involved, for instance, in the issue of predator animals. This was a process that was being run by Cape Nature when farmers put huge pressure on the government to give them the right to shoot any animals they wanted. The Premier took that process of public participation away from Cape Nature, put it into her own office, and decided which NGOs would take part in the process. The Landmark Foundation, which is a world leader in dealing with these issues, was purposely excluded from that process because the government didn't like the individual who leads that organization. We need to say also that we need to look at the way forward. There are many, as I said, the process is uneven both at a national and provincial level. And in this regard, the ANC has put into its election manifesto key issues of how it will work with civil society. The center of that program is the National Development Plan. And the National Development Plan processes have also looked at deepening the involvement of civil society in their development. For instance, our manifesto states that the state, in partnership with private sector, organized labor, and civil society, must create the conditions to accelerate economic growth and stimulate job creation. And as the ANC has worked in and out of government in the last 10 years, together with civil society, we will continue that in the next 5 years to ensure that there's a real partnership both with organized civil society and the people in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ozinski. Our second guest is here as a representative of the Democratic Alliance. Dr. Wilmot James serves as the DA's Shadow Minister of Trade and Industry. Welcome, Dr. James.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I thought I'll start off by thanking the hosts for inviting me, and I'm very pleased that you are all here and that I share the panel with the other two distinguished guests. I'm going to start off by very directly answering the questions that were put to me. The first question was, how should government engage with civil society organizations around issues of social development, human rights, and access to justice? And let me say that any effective and accountable democracy is reliant on the active participation of its citizens in the process of democracy, including through civil society organizations. Government should engage with partners in civil society to do the following things. Firstly, to identify best practice models on local, provincial, and national government level. Secondly, to study those models as case studies to develop recommendations for service delivery rollouts. Thirdly, to encourage peer-based training where good managers share best practice ideas with colleagues in other municipalities, provinces, and departments. And finally, to reward public institutions that develop innovative responses to society's challenges. The DA believes that an independent and a vibrant civil society is essential to the preservation of an open society because it acts as a bulwark against any attempt by the state or the ruling party to impose a hegemony of thought and truth over society. Second question was, what are your commitments to ensuring better access to improved non-profit funding, including amendments to legislation? And let me say that tax deductibility of charitable giving is a key focus of our work. To encourage charitable activities and investment in civil society organizations, we will reform the tax code to make it easier to set up charitable foundations, to increase the percentage of donations that may be tax deductible, and to remove restrictions on the buildup of capital by charitable foundations over time. Anybody knows the tax legislation that we have, it actually discourages all of the things I just mentioned. We will review the 10% tax deduction ceiling on charitable giving by wealthy individuals to encourage those who can invest in our country's people to do so. The DA's policy on social protection makes the following additional proposals around funding for NGOs and civil society organizations. First, to make use of longer funding cycles to encourage long-term financial and operational planning by NGOs and civil society organizations. And secondly, to maintain a dedicated research, monitoring, and evaluation unit within the Department of Social Development. This is in the Western Cape, and also nationally, which can provide support for funding reviews, so to ensure that public funding for civil society organizations really serve societal needs. We will also prioritize funding for organizations that support the provision of services that should actually be provided by an efficient state. Thus, fund organizations that fill the gaps in public service, the real gaps. Then, the final question, the third question, was who in government is responsible for liaison with MPOs and how does your party plan to improve this function? Let me say that all public leaders and decision makers have a responsibility to engage with interest groups to identify delivery failures and to work on collaborative solutions to society's problems. Civil society must also make effective use of the channels that are available for public participation, particularly in the processes of parliament around policy and legislation. Staying quiet means that you are giving implicit consent to bad legislation and policies. The DA engages in earnest with the public submissions of all organizations made to Parliament and voice our support for proposals that are aligned with our values. We invite civil society organizations to use the available platforms and to use interactions in a constructive manner to contribute to solutions. And finally, what are your plans to ensure effective and accessible public participation processes? Let me say that to promote accountability and cooperation between the government and the people of South Africa, the DA would ensure that all meetings of national and provincial parliament, parliamentary portfolio committees, local councils and council committee meetings are open to the public. To ensure that there is a proper ward committee system in place with membership that is truly representative of the local community. To make all relevant government information available online in an accessible format and at public libraries and municipal information centers. To aim to make as many government services as possible available online and to facilitate interaction with government through online platforms. And finally, to use both traditional and social media to foster participation by the public and civil society in the decisions and processes of government. By, for example, comment on policy green papers and bills, input at portfolio committee meetings, and input into integrated development plans on a local government level. Now, behind all of this lies a philosophy that rests on a commitment to an open society, in the sense that we have a society organized in order to maximize participation and the sharing of expert knowledge and a society that encourages debate, a society that shares information on a wide scale in a free media. We believe that an open society is the best way of generating opportunities and generating a momentum for ideas around best practice that I've just mentioned. I want to say, finally, make two comments about in response to my colleague Max. To first of all say that the National Ministry of Trade and Industry is responsible for the National Lotto. It's an ANC-run department, and it has been shocking in terms of how it's been managed. It's subject to corruption. It's subject to maladministration. Anybody on the receiving end of the National Lottery would understand that payments were not guaranteed, that the process for deciding how payments are made have been very bad. And the consequence is we've shut down many services. The minister is very committed to fixing it, but he's been quite ineffective in fixing it. We, on a portfolio committee level, have been working very hard to develop an amended piece of legislation that would make the allocation of, in fact, what is the largest fund available to support non-governmental organizations. So the ANC's record in terms of managing this important resource for development has been bad to deeply corrupt. The second point I want to make about the ANC and government has to do with the Western Cape. The first is that the Department of Arts and Culture under the ANC was used as a fund for having parties for the ANC. It was not used to support arts and culture in a way that was, and you can go through the records to see that. The second point is that in the Department of Public Works, at the time where the MEC was Marius Fransman, who was leader of the ANC in the Western Cape, Public Works had an experience in its budget of having an unexplained expenditure of 200 million rand. We've been struggling to pin it down, but certainly in terms of the books, that is very clear. And much of the money was used to support ANC-type election activities, including the printing of T-shirts during his time. So that there's been misgovernance in terms of the Western Cape in not all departments, but some departments, at a time when what we required was continued support for civil society and that money was diverted elsewhere. And so the ANC's record is not a good record, and let me leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James. Our final guest is Nazir Paulson, the Premier Candidate and Western Cape convener of the Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF. Welcome to you, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Ravimbo, Sarah, and Sheila, and the rest of the Inyathelo staff. Good morning to you, fellow guests, and to you, the audience. We live in a South Africa that, despite our democracy, despite our tremendous wealth, we remain one of the most unequal societies in terms of income. South Africa is one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. South Africa's Gini coefficient was measured at 0.63 in 2013. Simply put, 0 represents perfect equality, 1 represents perfect inequality. So we are closer to perfect inequality than we are to equality. On the 26th of July 2013, delegates from across the length and breadth of South Africa gathered in Soweto to discuss and resolve on the question of what is to be done. We gathered as non-governmental organizations, youth workers, traditional leaders, activists, movements, non-profit organizations, political parties, churches, intellectuals, academics, students, traditional chiefs, headmen, kings, independent councillors, internationalists. In other words, a very broad civil society. And to respond on the question as to what is to be done. We resolved that the economic freedom fighters should be an economic emancipation movement which should be mass-based, associate, and relate constantly with the grassroots and community movements. anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and most importantly, we would contest political power. Economic freedom fighters will therefore be an independent economic emancipation movement which will contest political power in all spheres of government. We believe that civil society plays a vital role in building and strengthening democracy. Democracy should not just be a right to participate in our political discourse, but that participation should ultimately lead to economic freedom. In other words, we should all benefit from the tremendous wealth that this country has to offer. I think the American Geological Society estimates that our mineral resource wealth is somewhere around $4.7 trillion, 47, almost 50 trillion rands. That's a lot of money. You're all civil society leaders, even you, Wilmot and Max, who are engaged in various efforts, in various ways. So I'm pleased to be able to share these ideas with you. By civil society, I mean the entire range of organized groups and institutions that are dependent or independent of state, voluntary, and at least to some extent self-generating and self-reliant. This, of course, includes non-governmental organizations like the ones in this room, but also independent mass media, think tanks, universities, and social and religious groups. What can the independent, voluntary, law-abiding, tolerant, and pluralistic organizations of civil society do to build and maintain democracy? The basic role of civil society is to limit and control the power of state. Of course, any democracy needs a well-functioning and authoritative state, but when a country is emerging from state oppression, it also needs to find ways to check, monitor, and restrain the power of political leaders and state officials, something that has become quite relevant to South Africa. Civil society must expose the corrupt conduct of public officials and lobby for good governance reforms. Even where anti-corruption laws and bodies exist, they cannot function effectively without the active support and the participation of civil society. You must strengthen democracy by providing new forms of interest and solidarity that cut across old forms of tribal, linguistic, religious, and other identity ties. I'm going to have to rush to the end. It's election time again. Monitoring the conduct of elections, this requires a broad coalition of organizations, unconnected to political parties or candidates, that deploys neutral monitors at all the different polling stations to ensure that the voting and vote counting is entirely free, fair, peaceful, and transparent. It is very hard to have credible and fair elections in our relatively young democracy unless civil society groups play this role. Civil society is not simply in tension with the state. Because civil society is independent of the state doesn't mean that it must always criticize and oppose the state. In fact, by making the state at all levels more accountable, responsive, inclusive, effective, and hence more legitimate, a vigorous civil society strengthens citizens' respect for the state and promotes their positive engagement with it. A democratic state cannot be stable unless it is effective and legitimate, with respect and the support of its citizens. Civil society is a check, a monitor, but also a vital part in the quest for the kind of positive relationship between the democratic state and its citizens. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the Inyathelo breakfast on the second floor. We're now going to hear from civil society, and we will open the floor to 2 questions at a time to various party members. And once those 2 have been handled, we'll take 2 more. I want to ask you to please keep the questions linked to the civil society debate. Otherwise, we could go on a whole trip into a completely different area. So I'm opening it to the floor.
I'm Manushka Williams from the Good Governance Learning Network, and I have a question to all three on the panel. My assessment has been that power belongs to people until they vote, and thereafter they are represented. In effect, public participation becomes a means of informing citizens and perhaps civil society of what is happening, like policies, frameworks, even the IDP. And a lot of the times, developmental goals have been predetermined and are set already, and citizens are just informed of policies and processes that are already drafted. And then at the end of the day, decisions are made in council by the ruling party. So how do you expect civil society and citizens to make meaningful contributions to such processes when they actually don't have the power in decision-making processes at all? And perhaps public participation processes aren't really taken in consideration when those decisions are made at council level. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
My name is Joseph Jacobs. I represent a couple of different networks and organizations here. My question is related to that as well. So maybe just keep it for there for now. And that is, I think hearing what you're saying is quite encouraging to hear. But actually seeing it in practice is a different story. And my question is exactly what the lady has been asking. How do we educate our people to engage in public debates and public discussions? Because it's one way of informing them about the platforms that are available, and it's another if they are not educated as to how they can utilize and engage that. I mean, we come from an era where we say power to the people and for the people, by the people. So how do we enable our people that the masses out there that has never been educated as to how to effectively engage in the machineries of state and government?
Okay, thank you. We've got two very similar questions, so I'm going to ask each member of the panel to respond quickly.
Thanks for the questions. I think part of the answer is to look at the relationship between formal democracy and direct democracy. This is obviously an issue that's there's been a lot of debate in the liberation movement about over time. But of course, the circumstances of our situation don't allow just a simple process of direct democracy. We also have representative democracy. And I think that's very important in building national unity, building cohesion in our society, that you have a force, both a political party like the ANC and Parliament, which represents the whole people and not just sectional interests amongst the people. The second answer I would give, and I think there are probably a number of answers and things that need to be done, is that institutions like government, which require public participation, also need to invest in giving people the capacity to participate in those processes. I'm sure Wilmot also has this experience, but you go in a committee and you're there maybe to discuss a very distinct bill on a housing issue, and people will come and raise every housing issue they have rather than the issue around the bill. So education is vital to participation, and that's some of the critique I was also trying to raise about what I see in the province.
If I can just say that we're clearly talking about different levels of government, where the decision-making happens, so it's municipal, provincial, and national. And it is an obligation on the part of all of those governments to have public participation programs and to consult with citizens about decisions to be taken and its implementation. To consult doesn't mean that you hand over managerial prerogative. That's been the big mistake in our education system in certain provinces, where the prerogative to decide has been handed over to trade unions, to SATU, for example. Not in all provinces, but in some, and some key ones like the Eastern Cape. So instead of government being able to make a decision about how to spend taxpayers' money, it is government's role to do that. It is not the role of ordinary citizens to make that decision finally, but there must be consultation. If consultation is inadequate, then we need to know about that. I don't represent the city of Cape Town. As a party, we believe in the separation of party and state. I don't speak on behalf of Patricia de Lille, the mayor, or the council. But certainly, if there are not enough opportunities for consultation, then that's a problem. and it's an issue that should be raised. So let me make that one point. The other point, in response to your question, clearly we need educational opportunities for South African citizens to acquire information and knowledge and to really begin to analyze politics around them and not just be mere recipients of information. But education empowerment in the end is up to individuals. You know, they're the opportunities, they have to be grabbed. You must insist on quality, must insist on proper sort of intellectual content. You must insist that teachers demand kids to stretch their cognitive abilities, all of those things. But in the end, it is up to us. And we can, you know, acquire the knowledge and acquire the information and acquire the will, actually, to be active participants. So it really is a partnership. And I think civil organizations can help in that process. It's a sad fact, actually. Somebody raised the issue around election monitoring, that all our election monitoring independent bodies have actually disappeared. IDASA was one of those, it's gone. The Electoral Institute, is that still around? I'm not sure. And so that's really a serious failure. And it's partly to do with the fact that when government looks for partnerships with NGOs, they look to help them deliver services. So that's one side. The other side are NGOs that work in the arts and culture field, and they obviously depend on government funding. But those who monitor the Constitution and deal with democracy monitoring, there's no funding line for them. In a really progressive government, you should have had funding coming from the Department of Constitutional Development to give them money and then to stay away from it altogether, how that's spent. That would be a really progressive thing. They do it partly in Germany, that kind of funding line. So democracy, I'm being told to wrap up. Democracy monitoring is being starved of funding within our country, and it's a serious problem.
Yeah, I think Wilmot kind of lost the question. I think yes, on the weekend of the 17th of January, the Commander-in-Chief of the Economic Freedom Fighters, President-in-Waiting Julius Malema himself, conducted consultative forums around the Western Cape. We went into communities, fishing communities, farming communities. We went to areas where they were experiencing poor service delivery in the Western Cape. Areas like Blikkiesdorp, areas which have become concentration camps for our people, areas like Valhalla Park. And he went and he consulted with people as to what it is that they need government to do for them. Now, we are not a boardroom political party like my distinguished fellow guests here. We are a party of the people. Our manifesto has then incorporated all those things that ordinary people have said they want a government to do for them. So I think it's very important, and you're right, Melissa, that government should move closer to the people. It should not just be relied upon civil society, but government should partner with that civil society to get closer to the people. And not civil society shouldn't be that gap that stands between the people, ordinary citizens of this country, and government. Government should move very closer to the people. Parliament has become a useless institution where people go and enrich themselves and they rely on civil society, and in the case of the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape, consultants to do the work for them. Government should start delivering on its mandate to the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Two questions, Lawson and James. I'll come back to you later.
Lawson Naidu from CASAC. First question is around the issue of public participation, which we've spoken about in a very formalized way between citizens and formal structures of the state, whether it be government or parliament. The question I have is, what scope is there for reform of the electoral system to create a more dynamic relationship of ongoing participation between ordinary citizens and members of parliament? And I think some of the panelists have confused the issue of government and parliament as two separate branches of the state. And the second question to Nazir in particular, if the EFF win the election, will you change the constitution to change the office of the president to that of the commander-in-chief?
Thank you. James?
Hi, I'm James Taylor. I do my work through the Community Development Resource Association, which has been looking for many years to help organizations find new forms that operate around power being used very differently. And my question is around that. We all understand the ideal role of civil society, but we all know how it works in practice. My question is a practice question, not an ideology question, and I want to direct it at all three. We're looking for new forms of organization that really work differently. And I want to ask each of you in your own organizations whether you are experimenting, not with what you're doing out there in the world, but I think you struggle like all NGOs, like all business organizations, like any other organizations. You concentrate wealth and power at the apex. You start calling your leaders commanders-in-chief, which is about command and control. My question is, within your own organizations, are you experimenting with any new forms that can give hope to us who've been looking for decades for organizational forms that don't invite the less powerful to participate in your process? The problem of all NGOs. We wanted the community to participate in our projects. Government is meant to be participating in the project of civil society, not the other way around. Now, are just little glimmers of hope in your own organizations for experimentation with real new forms? We've dreamed of transformation for a long time. Thank you.
Start with the EFF and come this way.
Yes, I think this is one of the problems with our present system. We've got a representative democracy. No? Okay. I think it's one of the problems with our present system. It's a representative democracy. You elect someone, he goes and represents you, he makes decisions for you. If those decisions are bad, there's no consequences unless they've got a commander-in-chief in that organization that will deal with that person. So I think we should look at maybe a constituency-based democracy where representatives will be elected for a particular constituency. If that representative then fails that constituency or to deliver to that constituency, that representative can be recalled. That is not the case at present. You can't recall anyone because you voted for a party, and in most cases the current parties are useless, those in government. If one looks at the level of service delivery protests in this country, we are the most unstable country from 2013 up until now, due to the lack of service delivery. So yes, that's one of the things we'd like to change, that you have a constituency-based system and your elected official gets recalled if he fails. We would like that if there's a problem with services, that representative for that constituency goes and he camps out there until it's solved. He doesn't say, okay, what's happening here? Okay, right, and he goes to his office and that's it. He must make sure that service is delivered and the issue and the dispute is resolved. It mustn't continue going on forever. And no, President Julius Malema will be President Julius Malema when he takes over the presidency. Commander-in-Chief is a title he holds within the organization. Lawson?
Thank you.
We are committed to have a mixed electoral system. The problem with a constituency system, my friend, is that it's unconstitutional. The Constitution requires proportionality. That's all it asks for. And the direct PR system that we have is very, very, very good at meeting that requirement because it includes minority voices. So if you get 2% of the vote, if you get 1% of the vote, you actually get represented in Parliament. In a pure constituency system, there will be no small parties. You'll just have a two-party system, perhaps at best a three-party system emerge. Because so what's required is a mixed system. You cannot have a constituency system, pure one, because that actually is unconstitutional. So we have proposed as a party to have a mixed system, like they have in Germany. We have 500 constituency-based MPs and then 200 PR as a top-up to restore proportionality. So that's our proposal. On the question, I mean, you ask a fundamentally important question, sir, about power and the root of power. Power rests on assets in this capitalist economy that we have, quasi-capitalist. Rests on assets, and what happens is that in political organizations competing for state power, which rests essentially on taxpayers' revenue, it's the ability to make decisions about how to distribute the biggest slice of public goodies. It's an enormous power to have. And we have an electoral system, and we have a party system competing over state power. In a democracy, but it's been dominated by the ANC since 1994. So that sets the terms. And I'm afraid the organizational design that comes out of that in party systems tend to be very hierarchical. They tend to be very top-down. And so what you have to do is work against that logic. And so we are committed to working against that logic, because one of the things that you need in renewal, I'll be just brief, renewal is you need to educate and train and mentor young people into the organization constantly in order to have new ideas and young blood. And so we have a young leaders program and a mentorship program on a wide scale to do that. And then you need decision-making bodies that can make decisions that incorporate as many people as possible on an expanding scale. So the EFF will discover this. They will need an organization that can make decisions that are durable, that doesn't depend on one person, the commander-in-chief, but involves all of the public representatives in the system. So it's a constant challenge to find a matrix and organizational design that, in fact, can distribute power rather than concentrate power. But it's about the goodies and the money, and people want access to it.
I would firstly say that these things are complex and there are no simple solutions. If you look at local government, we do have precisely that mixed system that Wilmot is talking about, where you have directly elected ward councillors accountable to a ward constituency, and then a proportional situation with the balance built into the system. I don't think everyone is happy with the kind of local government representatives that we elect generally. So I would like to say that I don't think the system is simply the solution to this. It's how we use the systems that are created. Clearly the problem in local government like in Cape Town, you have wards, about 18,000 voters in a ward. It seems a relatively small number. You would think a councillor could easily relate to that number of people. It's very difficult, because in all of those wards you have sectional interests, you have different interests, etc., etc. So I don't think the solution is simply the system. We need to help people to participate in the system, and I think that's the crux of it, whatever system you have there. I'm also very worried about a situation where you only have two competing parties at whatever level, like we have in Europe, where basically every country only has two parties contending for power, and the majority of people feel so disillusioned about participating in the system that they don't even go to vote in most of those countries. So we need to be aware of not changing things to make it worse. We need to change to better. In terms of the very good question about new forms of organization, I think all the time we're looking at that. In fact, what we have brought in the last 20 years are the beginnings of those new forms of organization. I think we need to be very careful of seeing democracy as something that we just create overnight. That, like you bring a new law and then there's a democracy. Clearly our own experience is that, and the experience of the world, is that it'll probably take generations to create a real democracy. And these are just the first learning steps that we're doing there. And if you look, for instance, say at CPFs or school governing bodies as institutions of local democracy, there are many, many problems in them as well, although they seem to me to be the right path to go along. Thanks.
Okay, there was someone right at the back.
My name is Ayanda Denge. I'm from a movement called Sweat and Sisonke. I'd like to ask a question basically to all three present parties today. Your main aim, the main highlight of this breakfast is that you need power. After you are given the power that you want, are you going to look back at civil society? are you going to make time to avail yourself to actually hear the queries and hear our problems as civil society, or will you be too busy in your diary flying up and down?
I'm wondering how we can better the collaboration between the ANC and the DA, where something does actually have societal benefit and everyone can see the value in it, but the hoops you have to jump through to get to that do require a certain amount of collaboration for which there is no process at the moment, and that is my frustration. So I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Okay, thank you. I will start with Wilmot then.
Well, we have both in our constitution and in a series of laws and the way in which the ministries are organized, cooperative governance as an important element. And so those provisions have been made, and they often work in practice, and often they are unseen. I mean, we're right now in the election season, which is a kind of a silly season, but in the normal course of events, then there has to be cooperation with DTI, for example, and economic affairs in the Western Cape. We have to have it. In order to make the special economic zones work, we believe in the special economic zones. We have some disagreements of some elements, but you need cooperation on many levels. We implement in the Western Cape pilot projects in health. It's part of the national health insurance, and so on and so forth, all in the interest of serving citizens. So the problem is if there are blockages there, it's a serious problem, because often those blockages are personality-based. The minister doesn't like an MEC somewhere, and so there's hostility there. And so we need a much better way of having cooperative governance function properly with barriers being able to be broken down in the interest of your accessing. So there are opportunities. But I think in the end, we should just talk. I would love to talk to you about how we actually, in practice, break down those barriers, because it often takes personal intervention, which is unfortunate, but often it takes that.
Okay, Nazir, do you want to comment?
Yes. I think in the list of fearless activists that we'll be sending to the provincial legislature and the National Assembly, these activists are rooted in the daily struggles of our people. They are not divorced from the people. We don't have to send them to leadership schools to teach them about the struggles of the people. They are aware of those struggles. They will live amongst those communities. They will make sure that there's this constant engagement with those communities about the challenges and issues that affect their daily lives. So yes, our government, or the government of the EFF, will be the government of the people. It won't be a government that's divorced from the people. And yes, we may probably be two political parties, given what could transpire. I could see the ANC and the DA get along quite comfortably. Very much similar. They share similar values and similar disregard for human dignity, given the level of service delivery protests, both within the province and on a national level. These are all the challenges that people face. Meneer, I am a fighter. You can speak to the comrade in the next to you. Maybe you'll feel differently. Thank you very much, Sheila.
Max?
In my own experience, the biggest problem in Cape Town is actually the relationship between the city and the provincial government. And that's been true through all different parties being in power in different situations. The city is larger than the provincial government. It has more real power if you look at it in those terms. And it itself determines a lot of things which happen. And I know the DA has been struggling with that process for the last 5 years in a very real sense. But just to Ayanda's question, Ayanda, I think our track record is that many of us, if not most of us, actually come from civil society, come from the struggle, and we've never left that aside. I know in my work, I probably spent 60, 70% of my working time in communities rather than sitting in my office. And I know that's true for most of my colleagues as well.
I must make this point, because I'm not quite sure what planet my friend is living on. Is it that the ANC and the DA share similar commitments and similar practices, but they disagree fundamentally on two things. think the ANC has a high tolerance for corruption. We don't. No, it's true. I'm not saying Max does. Max was fearless in trying to deal with the corruption. We actually quite admire his work and his commitment. But there's a high. If you look at what's happening within Canada, you can see what it looks like. A high tolerance for corruption. We're losing 36 billion rand a year in wasteful expenditure and corruption in this country. How many houses you can build for 36 billion rand? The second way is that we have a very different approach to how we grow jobs in this country and how you support the economy and what the role of the state in that process is. A fundamental difference. But we have coherent analysis. I can disagree with Max because I know what the analysis is. I know what the analysis is. I respect the fact that they have that analysis, but I disagree with it. I do not know what the EFF's analysis is. It's a series of slogans, and there's no coherent analysis of that.
Okay. We've got one question here and one at the back, and then we'll have to wrap up after the responses.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Good morning. My name is Luyan, not dealing. I'm from Activate Program Leadership, but I'm representing my organization from Kraaifontein, which is I'm doing acting. My question I want to ask to the panel today, I kind of feel like me as a young person who's doing art, in all the manifestos that I've been hearing, I don't see the art being catered for. Because there's lots of young people we want to partake in these political things, but in terms of art, we are not represented. I want to do my toy through poetry, but I don't want to go and protest. But there are no avenues for us to get funding and stuff to maintain the organizations that we have in the community. Because you might find that lots of us are using drugs and stuff because we've got nothing to do. We do have organizations, but there's no help that we're getting. The city have got community halls, but we need to pay to get those halls. And then when we do nothing, we don't participate in things, we're being called names like we're lost generation. But I would like to know what are these parties are going to offer us as young people who are doing art.
I really want us to look in the answers to the two issues. The big one is the funding, particularly of the arts. And the second one is how to sustain civil society in terms of your policies. So I'll ask Max this time to start.
I think firstly on the second question, if it was a question, we need to be very careful about nationalizing civil society. In other words, if civil society becomes dependent on the state for its funding completely, then it will also have to will always have to be accountable to the state in some way. So we need to be very careful about that process. And that's why I believe the state must assist civil society. At times, government programs must even give money to civil society. But we must avoid having a civil society that only exists because the state gives its money. That would be my first point about that. I think the art question is a little bit more difficult because in a situation where people don't have schools with electricity, in a situation where people don't have water in their houses or don't have houses at all, it's always difficult to prioritize art and things like that above other areas. There is a large amount of money that goes to art, but one of and cultural issues, but one of the difficulties we've had is that we inherit a state that already gives a lot of money to particular cultural institutions, and those were racially defined. I know, and I disagree with what Wilmot said about the Department of Arts and Culture in the province, because I don't know about projects for T-shirts, as he put it. But what I do know is that when the ANC was in power in the province, that we started to redirect funding. For instance, there's the Migrant Labor Museum in Luandle. We gave money to them. We've given money to the arts projects in Langa. But that money had to come from somewhere else, and that meant cutting off funding to museums, to the ballet in Cape Town, to the symphony orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. So that's always the problem in government. I think, though, that you'll see that funding has increased, but the difficulty, as I'm trying to say, is to give it to new organizations and sectors that haven't received it in the past.
There's a constitutional provision which is the right of association, and so we obviously support that, so people can form organizations to serve a certain end, and the state has no role to play in that. What the state should do is support it. This idea of nationalizing civil society sounds like the road to totalitarianism. We won't be able to move because we're under state control. South Africa has a history where there's this idea that the state has the answer to everything. Because of our history, the state was formed first, and the state played a direct interventionist role in the ordering of society racially through apartheid and whatever. But every time there's a problem now, we turn to the state for an answer. The state can provide some of the answers. But it takes a very long time, historically, to embed the notion that we are individuals and we have individual rights, but we have an obligation to the community, but the community doesn't have the obligation to impose its own view on whether there should be provision of, say, abortion, whether there should be a provision of other things, and so on. So that balance is a very delicate balance between the individual and the community and the state. And what we need to do is preserve our individual rights, but at the same time contribute to the public good.
Thank you. Okay, the last word is the EFF.
The EFF, you said that none of the manifesto speaks to the issue of arts, but I think we as the EFF have made special mention of arts and culture in our manifesto, and how the state would play a meaningful role in promoting arts and culture, especially amongst our youth. We of course also look at culture like the Khoisan culture, for example, which is nearing extinction, and we'd want to revitalize that and make that and popularize it amongst citizens of South Africa, the cultural practices of the First Nation. How we see the role of civil society: yes, you should always be independent, but that doesn't mean that government shouldn't play a role in making sure that civil society organizations become sustainable as well, whether it's through funding or other means necessary. In terms of finding money, we don't have a problem finding money. We live in a country with tremendous wealth, and we will not hesitate to nationalize the mineral resources of this country. Whether it's full nationalization or whether it's partial, the nationalization is very high on agenda after land expropriation. So we don't have issues when it comes to funding civil society organizations.
I'd like to end the debate there. Thank you very much, and I'll ask Ravimbo to close up the program.
Thank you very much to Sheila. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Dr. James, and thank you, Nazia, for also coming through today. Thank you very much to all our guests. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces joining us for one of our conversations here at Inyathelo. We do invite you to join us for more tea, coffee, and breakfast at the Resource Center, which is across the way. And thank you so much for helping us to strengthen civil society within South Africa.
Thank you.